Well, it's a windy, cold, late fall morning here on Charis. The wind is howling, the wind turbine is whirring away, producing power like the Hoover Dam. You probably can't hear it through the mic, although I did take off the dead cat to capture a little more of the background noise. But this morning I want to talk a little bit about the Wallas heater, diesel hot air heater. That's the backbone of the main star of my installed heating systems on Charis. So on a cold morning like this, I think it was about 30 this morning, I will wake up and reach around from under the covers and back over here to this controller. On the bulkhead, just at the head of my bunk. Press the go button, and then climb back into the bunk and read the morning news and entertainment. Let the boat get warmed up a bit, and climb out from under the covers. Now, one of the things I love the most about the Wallas is that when I swing my feet down here onto the cabin stall, they are right in front of one of the two heater duct outlets. And so you put your feet down on a nice warm deck. It's always good. The Wallas is very effective, heats the cabin up very quickly. So there are different controllers available for the Wallas. This is an older unit. I've had this one for about 10 years. So this is a strictly analog controller. Basically, it has a heat off vent switch. The vent switch would allow you just to run the circulating air fan, move air through the boat with that, and then simply a speed rheostat to adjust the level of output by adjusting the fan speeds. Nothing fancy. There are more sophisticated digital controllers, and I'm sure the newer units, probably all the controllers are more sophisticated than this one. So in my installation, the Wallas is installed in the head. You may recall from a previous video that Charis has a walk-through head between the forward cabin and the main cabin. And that allows me to install the Wallas in a central location in the wet locker inside the head, and it works fairly well. These units are about the size and configuration of an old school briefcase. They're designed to be bulkhead mounted. You can see that they exhaust out the top. You'll also see here, light stays on, that I've installed a small computer fan with a thermocouple sensor to circulate air, essentially otherwise waste heat, within the wet locker. Makes it really nice when you pull on your fall weather gear, and it's been warmed up nicely, or your sea boots down the bottom of the locker there. One thing you will note, there's a grate that I've put over the front of the Wallas. A little hard to see here. It's basically a baker's cooling sheet, just to make sure that nothing blocks the intake air that goes in the front. I also use a bungee cord to hold the hanging fall weather gear in the locker back away from the Wallas. That incidentally is good practice anyway on a boat. If you leave your hanging clothing loose, you'll find that it basically wears itself out from the constant motion of the boat. So anything that's hanging in a hanging locker should either be packed so tight that it can't move, or restricted with a bungee cord so that it's not swinging freely as the boat sways. So one of the features that makes the Wallas stand out among the forced hot air diesel heaters is its top exhaust. I should note that this unit is not a bus heater. It was never designed to be used in mass transit sort of vehicles or RVs. I think the original inception point was for use to be split between boats and off-grid cabins. It's a completely unique animal among this type of heater and incredibly efficient. This is, of all the diesel heaters that I've used, by far the most fuel miserly, and there's good reason for that. But first, the top exhaust is interesting. You'll notice that it's only insulated in a couple of places. That's where the thermocouple is for the computer fan. But otherwise, that pipe goes straight up through, comes up and over, and is going out through the house side, not the hull. And you see the loop goes all the way up to the cabin top. Essentially, this unit has a double pipe for the exhaust and combined air intake. And you can actually put your hand on it. It gets warm, but it never gets truly hot. So the genius of this double pipe is that what the unit is doing is it's using a special fitting at the outlet. And that fitting is both exhaust and air intake. So the combustion air is being pulled into the unit between the exhaust pipe and the outer pipe. So the exhaust pipe inside is probably about a 1-inch diameter. The outer pipe is 2-inch diameter. The design of the chamber within the Wallas is such that the fans are drawing air in from outside the boat around the exhaust, which is flowing out through the central pipe. In other words, the combustion air is preheated by the exhaust. This does a couple of things. Number one, it makes the combustion more efficient because you're starting with a higher temperature for your combustion air. So your diesel fuel combustion has a bit of a head start with the heated intake air. Number two, it is essentially allowing you to have an uninsulated pipe carrying the exhaust gases out of the boat. Another noteworthy feature of the Wallas is that it's fairly quiet. Again, I don't know if the microphone will pick the sound level up well here, but there is absolutely no loud roar of a little jet engine like you get with the bus heaters. This thing is quiet enough to be at the head of your bunk without being disturbing at all. It's just a light background noise. And so these units are designed to be installed in the living space. Notably, the bus heater type are generally not installed within the cabin. They're usually back in a sail locker or in some other part of the boat where the noise is muffled. So the advantage to a quieter unit that's mounted inside the boat is that the ducting is very simple. In this case, there are two outlet ducts on the side of the Wallas. Those are fairly heavily insulated here, but they come down into aluminum ductwork that basically leads one forward, which exits down here in the corner in the main cabin. Sorry, that one's aft, not forward. The other one leads forward. And that's the foot warmer that I so love when I swing out of bed. But basically that just runs down a very short distance through a locker. So the installation is relatively simple because you're not running miles of ductwork through the boat. And again, efficiency there's a little lost heat. That's why I've got this fan in the wet locker. And often I'll actually run this with the door to the wet locker open, so some of that heat spills out into the head. But you're essentially installing the unit where all of the heat that you're creating with it can be harvested in the cabin of the boat. So for a fuel source for the Wallas, I opted to use a separate 2.5 gallon jerry jug mounted in the locker below the unit. Again, keeps it simple, allows everything to be close in one place. Fuel lines are short, and it's very easy to pull that jerry jug out and swap it out for a full one when I need to. So the Wallas uses pretty much the same small magnetic metering fuel pump as the bus heaters, but they do a much better job of quieting it. It's on right now, so if you could hear it, you'd hear it, and you really don't. If you really pay attention carefully, you can hear the little clicking sound, but it's extremely faint. The thing that it does let you get a sense for is how much less fuel this uses than the bus heaters, because it's essentially the same volume pump as the bus heater, but the clacking sound is at a much lower frequency, which means it's pumping fuel much slower. So these units are based on a burner that is similar to the reflex diesel heaters. Those are convection draft heaters that are loved by fishermen and serious high latitude boats. Extremely reliable. But the burner is what you'd call a drip pot burner, and fuel is essentially dripped into a sort of a stainless steel gauze or a fuzzy pad, and it's kept hot enough to keep the fuel combusting within there. The difference is between the Wallas and the reflex is that the Wallas is using fans. There are actually two fans in here. One fan is controlling the combustion air and exhaust, and the other fan is circulating the cabin air. So one of the differences between this and the bus heaters, which use a single axis motor to drive both of their fans, is that in here you have two separate motors. Does it use more power? Slightly, perhaps, but not really notably more power than the bus heater once it's ignited and burning. Another thing that's worth noting is that, in common with the bus heaters, these units, once lit, stay on, and output is varied just by varying the fans and the fuel rate. So these are not furnaces or heaters that turn on and off in the traditional sense that you would have one in a household. So my first Wallas heater that I installed was also where I learned the adage that you may have heard me use of don't make $1,000 worth of holes in your boat for a $100 heater. That was somewhat what drove the concept behind the toolbox heater. That first one came from a consignment shop, and corollary note to that is probably if someone's gone to the trouble to uninstall a furnace from their boat, it's probably not worth installing in yours. Anyway, that first unit was an earlier Wallas. It was designed to run on mineral spirits or kerosene, but not really diesel. I got it all installed. It never really functioned right. I sent it out to Seattle twice to try and get it fixed, and they finally threw their hands up and said that it really just wasn't worth fixing. And at that point I bought the first new Wallas furnace that I installed on Charis, and it ran okay. It was problematic. I suspect it may have had issues straight from the factory, but it ended up going back for repairs a couple of times. Finally, after one return for repair, it was deemed just not worth fixing, so I'm now running the second brand new one that I've purchased. And granted, that's over a period of 20 plus years, so they do last a while. They do run reasonably well when they run, but they are a bit high maintenance. So the maintenance of any diesel fired heater on a boat is going to be relatively high. You have intense heat, you have electronics, you have a lot of pieces in there that don't play nice together. But the issue with the Wallas, as I mentioned in my toolbox heater video, is that it has a single US service point in Seattle. That's the one dealer service center, Scan Marine, and no complaints about Scan Marine. They've always treated me well. They've been through a couple of changes of ownership in the many years I've dealt with them, but always good folks there. They've really gone the extra mile to keep some of my older heaters running, and bear in mind that my use of these heaters is on a fairly industrial level. It's not weekend warrior light casual use. So but that said, if there is a dark side to the Wallas heater, it's that little feeling of trepidation when you go to press the go button that says, will this be the time that I'm buying first class plane tickets for this unit to go to Seattle? Will this be the time that it gets to Seattle and they say, yeah, it's really not worth fixing, you're going to need to shell out somewhere near $3,000 for a replacement unit? It does put a little pause in your step as you go to push the go button, but after all, if you're going to live north of the tropics, you need heat and you need to keep it running, you need to maintain it. So the Wallas produces heat and produces it well, and there's a cost for that. So one final side benefit, footnote to the Wallas, is that because the ducting runs through and under the head wash basin on its way out to the main cabin, even though that line is insulated, there's a fair amount of residual heat that comes into this little cabinet that houses the wash basin. So, if you want to do your morning washing up with some nice warm water, my recommendation is that while the Wallas is cranked up and heating the boat, go ahead and fill your wash basin, and you've essentially got waste heat hot water, or at least warm water anyway, for your morning wash up. Well, thanks for coming aboard this morning, folks. That's my rundown on the Wallas forced hot air heater, and hope you are warm and comfortable wherever you are, and you get to enjoy the late season cruising that this kind of equipment allows.